Great, so this video today is going to be about the skin. Specifically, we're going to talk about the epidermis and the dermis. These are the two layers of the skin. So, if I were to do, if we were to look at a section of the skin going from superficial to deep, it obviously consists of two layers, right? And right up here, this is the surface. Right. The first layer is called the epidermis, this guy, and kind of looks like that. The bottom of the epidermis is kind of wavy like this. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then the second layer, the deep layer, is called the dermis. Okay, so we have the epidermis here, then we have the dermis down there. Okay, so the epidermis, if we look at the deepest, kind of the right border between the epidermis and the dermis, the first layer of the epidermis is called the Stratum Bissau. And it is one layer thick, one cell layer thick. And this primarily consists of stem cells that line that border between the dermis and the epidermis. Okay, and these stem cells are constantly dividing. All right, so you have all these stem cells that kind of make up this first layer. And these guys, really, they're stem cells, but another name for them, and this is the kind of the name of the most common cell in the skin. It's called a keratinocyte. So let me label this guy. This guy is a keratinocyte. All right. And so this is the youngest keratinocyte that we find in the epidermis. And what these guys are doing is that they are constantly dividing through mitosis in this direction. All right. So these are just stem cells that are constantly undergoing mitosis to crank out copies of themselves. But the important thing is they're always going out. They always divide out. That first layer of cells, the youngest keratinocytes, that's what composes the stratum Bissau. Okay. Now, it's not only these stem cells that compose the stratum Bissau. About 1 out of every 10 cells is going to be something different. I'm going to color this guy in. So maybe like 1 out of every 10 cells is going to be something, I can't do him because he's already divided, but like these guys. 1 out of every 10 cells is something different. All right, and this guy is called a melanocyte. And melanocytes are different, okay? So they're cells that have these long extensions that stretch out all around the other cells that were just created. So we'll draw some more keratinocytes all through here, just kind of like that. And these melanocytes have these extensions that extend out all through that network of keratinocytes. And what those melanocytes do is they produce a pigment called melanin. All right, so melanin. What melanin does is melanin's kind of like our own built-in sunscreen. It's a pigment that absorbs ultraviolet radiation from the sun. These melanocytes will deposit this pigment right on the superficial surface of the nuclei that are inside of these keratinocytes. And that's perfect because that melanin will absorb the sunlight, the radiation coming from the sun, and it prevents a lot of that radiation from entering the nucleus because that's where all the DNA is. Okay, so it really protects our skin cells from the sunlight. Okay, good. So first layer is the stratum Bissau. Second layer, which I kind of messed up my organization here, is about 5 cellators thick, and the second layer is called the stratum spinosum. And it's about 5 cellators thick. These guys consist of keratinocytes, so a bunch of keratinocytes, but they look a little bit different than the ones that you find in the Stratum Bissau. These keratinocytes have all these little tiny little spikes coming out of them. They almost look like the end of a medieval weapon or something like that. And the job of these cells, these keratinocytes, now again, remember, they're still keratinocytes, okay? These are just older versions of these young, newly kind of formed keratinocytes in the deepest part of the stratum spinosum. They're still keratinocytes, and they are starting to produce fibers of keratin. It's not keratin yet, but it's like pre-keratin fibers. Okay? And they have all these little spikes all over them. That's just kind of what their appearance looks like. Okay? All right. So then they're starting to produce keratin, but they haven't really done it yet. Now, the third layer is also, I don't know, 3 to 5 cellulars thick. This guy is called the Stratum Granulosum. It's 3 to 5 cellulars thick. And what the Stratum Granulosum is doing is these cells continue as they're getting, again, so these cells are dividing and they're pushing everybody towards the surface. So it's almost like this conveyor belt of cells. And in a cell will start out in the stratum basal, then it'll pass through the stratum spinosum. It'll start to produce these pre-keratin fibers. And by the time it gets to the stratum granulosum, now it's producing 2 specific granules. Okay? And the 2 granules that these guys are producing are, so I'll kind of do it over here, 2 granules. The first is a Glycol Lipid. All right. And the Glycol Lipid helps the skin become waterproof. Okay, so this is the layer where the skin develops the substance, this Glycol Lipid, it secretes it, it provides this waterproof shield. Okay, now if you think about it, all this skin, okay, all of these cells, these keratinocytes, they're not innervated by blood vessels because it's epidermis. Epidermis, by definition, it doesn't have blood vessels. So it gets all the nutrition. These cells get their nutrition from the underlying dermis, which consists of connective tissue, which does have a lot of blood vessels in it. It's highly vascularized. But if we have a waterproof layer right here, so I'll just kind of draw this as a waterproof layer right here in the stratum granulosum. Every cell on the other side of that barrier is not going to get any type of nutrient from the blood vessel because diffusion is blocked, right? If there's any type of nutrients diffusing from the dermis into the skin, it's going to be blocked right here at the stratum granulosum. So everything superficial to this layer is dead, okay? So the first granule they secrete is a Glycol Lipid, and the second granule that they secrete are called keratohyaline granules. And these are the granules, keratohyaline. These are the granules that will eventually become the keratin, which makes up the fibrous, tough proteins of the skin, which gives the skin its structure. Okay, good. Now, after the stratum granulosum, we have another layer, which is really thick. This is called the stratum corneum. Okay, and the stratum corneum is about 20 cell layers thick, and it consists of dead keratinocytes. Basically, after these keratinocytes pass through the stratum granulosum, that waterproof barrier, they die. All the cytoplasm and all the organelles, they just kind of shrivel up, dry out. And what you're left with is a shell that was basically the old cell membrane. So it's almost like if down here you have the brand new car, right? Down here, this is what goes to the junkyard. It's like that smashed up version of the car. it's done, it's dead. And see,